fuck me, Jesus Christ. Hello everyone and welcome to Anime Club After Dark's movie reviews, a spoiler-free discussion detailing the good, the bad, and the downright ridiculous of anime movies. I'm your host Alex, but you can call me Senpai, and tonight I am joined by our czar of source material, John.
Hello.
And tonight we will be reviewing 1984's Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind, directed by Hayao Miyazaki and produced by Studio Ghibli. So, John, when we watched it, because we actually just got through watching this, was this the first time you'd ever seen it or no?
This was the first time I've ever seen this movie.
Wow. For me, it was definitely not the first time. The very first time I watched this was back in 1996 when I was just a babby. This is actually the very first anime I ever watched, so I kind of attribute this movie to, allowing me to become an anime fan. So it does have a special place in my heart. That being said, I'm going to try to remain unbiased while I review this.
Oh, man, I'm about to trash this movie so bad. Oh, jeez.
As I mentioned, so this movie was released back in 1984, 36 years ago, with a budget of 108 million yen. That's just under $1 million US. And just for comparison, another animated feature that was released around the same time was The Fox and the Hound by Disney. That had a budget of $12 million. So, I mean, while we talk about this, think about that. You can go watch Fox and the Hound. It's a great movie. If you've never seen that Disney movie, it's a fantastic movie. I definitely recommend it. But, I mean, just think about, it had 12 times the budget of this. So we're going to talk obviously about the art and animation style a little bit. In fact, it's probably what we're going to get into first. I just keep that in mind about how little money this was made for at the time.
Yeah, I wanted to include this metric just so, when we're reviewing things that were released so long ago, it's hard to, think of it as good because it's like, well, first of all, I wasn't even alive at the time this film was made.
And as old as I am, neither was I. This was 6 years before I was born.
Yeah, so you got to look at it through a lens of well, if we were back in the 1980s and we were watching these, did it actually look good, or are we just so spoiled on the ultra high graphics we have now, Mm-hmm. Moving on to the animation, one thing I really liked about this movie was the monsters that they show in it. So in Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind, they're kind of living in a post-apocalyptic world. It takes place thousands or 1,000 years or something.
Yeah, it's just over 1,000 years in the future.
Yeah,
roughly.
So you gotta give it credit where it's due. When it shows the monsters, I believe they're all insect monsters.
Yeah, they're all insect based or insectoids of some kind.
Yeah, so they all move very organically, similar to how they're formed, and I thought that was really cool and impressive. When you make giant monsters in films, you don't have to make them move anatomically correct. They can do whatever kind of BS you want. But with the flying ones in there, with the ohms, those little pill bugs. Oh, I was like, that's so cool. They move very organically. If these were real, this is how they would move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and it's impressive again when you consider how old it was and how little money this was made for, that they were able to incorporate that so well. And also considering this was a completely hand-drawn movie. There was no computer assistance whatsoever. It is pen and paper to celluloid. So
and I can forgive it because of that, with the how it's animated, I guess. There's not a lot of movement in the film. A lot of it is just repeated frames overlaid on each other, but it still looks good to me.
Yeah, or zooming and panning on a single frame. That happens a lot in this movie.
And that's fine, that's just technology limited at the time, so I can't knock it too much for that. One thing I thought was really good was the good use of colors. Something that really, it's kind of a good thing, but also a bad thing. As you said, it was hand-drawn, and it was done on, what'd you just say?
Celluloid.
Celluloid. So the colors aren't very poppy, they aren't very vibrant, but they did have a good use of colors, showing the emotional state of the monsters with the color change between neutral blue to red. I thought that was a really good use to indicate the monster's feelings. I loved when they went into the forest. I just loved like the entire scenery. I was just like, wow, look at this unknown world. Like, what is this poison forest? It looked very much like Monster Hunter World, where when you enter a different biome, everything is very unique. And then the monsters that surround it, or in this case, the insects that surround it, are blending in very well with their surroundings. Like when Nausicaa's first going into the forest in the very beginning of the movie, we see that there's this like darkened, like spider-like monster that's in the background that I didn't even notice until it started moving. I was like, holy shit, there's a monster there.
Yeah, and one thing I really like, and you kind of touched on it, was that like every single insect that you see in this, they are basically the monsters of the movie, but every single insect you see, the way they're designed looks like they serve a purpose within this world. Like they look like they fit into a specific environmental niche in this world.
Yeah, and that's what's really good about this film. It's just amazing how much thought they put into these background assets that they really didn't need to, you know. Like when if we compare it to like The Fox and the Hound, it's animated beautifully. I love when, you know, obviously the Fox and the Hound are playing around with their little babies. It's cute as shit. But here in Nausicaa, they don't really have that much of an animation budget, so they make do with like just putting more assets in the background and just letting it breathe. You know, it's very organic. It looks like a real forest.
Yeah. I think probably the last thing to maybe say about the cinematography is that the way, I hate saying this, but it's very jumpy. Like there's a lot of jump cuts in this movie, and for the time that was actually quite standard. It's not really something that holds up today very well.
Yeah.
There's just so many jump cuts between scenes, and you're like, if you watch it now and you expect like high action, you're not gonna get it from this movie.
Yeah. But I think it's kind of okay because it kind of flows with the pacing of the film. But I'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to talk about for the art and animation is the character designs. I liked it a lot because at least with the main player characters, they're designed very well to fit their actual character, like what they're written as. Like when we meet, there's a different character. He's basically a fucking dirty bastard, and he has this shit-eating smile on his face. I'm just like, this guy. Are you
talking about Kurosawa?
Yeah, Kurosawa. He's like
the epitome of a mustache-twirling villain.
Yeah, and it worked so well. And like with his lines being delivered, I was just like, oh god, this guy. I hate this guy. Like it was very clearly established, like who a character's personality is, or what a character's personality is, just with the character design alone. And that's what I thought was wonderful.
Yeah, he actually, he seems like with his like spouting of one-liners constantly, he seems like he would not be out of place in the Marvel universe.
Yeah, big bad guy, man.
Yeah, like the character designs in general were like you say, they were pretty much on point. There's not a single one I can point to and say that were bad. Also, I guess you could say the mascot character of this movie, Teto, cute as fuck.
Oh yeah. See, I like mascot characters, but Teto didn't really play a part in this. But
no, but I mean that's a good mascot character where it doesn't distract from the actual story.
Yeah, it's just this little cute, like, was it a cat squirrel or whatever, a fox squirrel?
Fox squirrel.
Fox squirrel. It was cute though. I liked it.
Mm-hmm. And another thing about the character design before we move on is like it's you look at it and it's very heavily like 70s Disney inspired.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like this was released in the 80s, but it's very heavily Disney inspired.
Yeah. And I think that actually works for the story that's being told personally. But I guess moving on to like sound and music, this movie was scored by the legendary Joe Hisaishi, who has scored many, many, many other Ghibli movies. I think he's actually scored every Ghibli movie that Miyazaki personally worked on. What did you think of it? Because it has that combination of like symphony instruments with synthesizer, which I'm sure in the 80s was like new and like holy shit. But how do you think that first of all, how do you think it actually works for the story, and do you think that actually holds up the like I would say like the saturation of the synthesizer?
So I love the symphony bits. I just like symphony instruments in general. I like symphonies. The synthesizer I didn't really dig. I mean, I get it. Like during the '80s, synthesizers were just a huge thing. You know, what band out there wasn't using synthesizers? And I'm gonna chalk that up to, well, at the time it was impressive. I just felt a little bit out of place because when they mixed the symphony with the synthesizers, like the symphonies were used in the the neutral or the heartfelt moments of the film, right?
Mm-hmm.
It helps spell out that narrative for you, like, hey, this is an emotional, moving scene. And then when the battles started, it's like, oh, synthesizer, dun 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 dun. And it's like, yeah, I get it. But I just would have liked just pure symphony, in my personal opinion. That's, again, I'm a little biased on that. So I didn't think the synthesizers were out of place for a film at this current time, but it just seems like they could have used an orchestra to do the battle moments, you know, like fucking take a playbook out of like Star Wars or something, you know?
I mean, that might work.
I'm just saying, orchestras and symphonies do a lot more than people give it credit for. And I get that scoring it is pretty difficult, but I don't know. It just felt lackluster when I heard the synthesizers go off at every battle scene. I was like, oh, yeah, of course. Of course,
By the way,
synthesizers.
I should have brought this up when we were talking before about art and animation, but I just was looking through the staff that made Nausicaä, and apparently one of the key animators was a then relatively unknown Hideaki Anno.
Oh, shit.
So, yeah, there's a bit of trivia for you. Yeah, I kind of thought that too with the synthesizer. It's like one of those things, it was acceptable in the 80s.
Yeah.
Everything in the 80s had synthesizers to it. Every movie you went to, whether it was American or French or they all had synthesizers in their soundtrack. So I don't fault it at all for that. It was Joe Hisaishi trying something new, and I think for the movie it kind of works. But yeah, it definitely dates the movie too.
Well, especially since, like, you know, if it's post-apocalyptic, it's kind of, if they just went full synthesizer, I wouldn't have been as upset as I am now, because it's like, why would you go half and half, man? I hate that. Yeah. But again, I can't fault it because at the time it was current and it was the thing to do, right?
Yeah, it was.
But it's just like the synthesizer bits were a little bit tame, in my opinion. They weren't very good. They didn't sound very good. They were just like, oh, fast-paced stock music. Dun 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 dun. And I was like, you know, it's not very unique.
I mean, well, speaking of stock, that's actually a point of contention I have with this movie. So throughout most of the movie, a lot of the sound design and the sound effects that are utilized are very cartoonish, and they just sound very stock.
Yeah, so I had a problem with that sound design aspect as well. Whenever there's sound effects on the screen, they're very stock. There's nothing really unique, except maybe like when the insects chitter. That was kind of cool.
The insect sounds are relatively unique, but just about everything else is very stock. The sound of the airships, to the sound of like swords hitting each other, to the sound of guns going off, it all sounds so stock.
Yeah, and I get it. You know, they didn't have a big of a budget. You know, again, we brought that into the beginning because this is the main point. They didn't have many resources to do this with.
Yeah. I mean, it is a shame. I feel like maybe they could go back at some point and put in more, better sound effects, I guess.
Yeah.
But some people might say that's messing with the artist's intentions.
They had to do what they had to do, and given what they were given, it turned out okay. So
yeah, it did.
It's not bad.
It's not unwatchable, but it's definitely noticeable.
And oh my god. So since this is my first viewing, you told me this was the second dub that we watched, the one that Disney provided.
Yeah, that's something to point out. So when we just got finished watching this, we watched the English dub of it, and it's important to point out it's the second English dub of this movie.
Yeah, and since this is my only viewing, this only applies to the second viewing, but holy shit, man. That voice acting was amazing. They had A-list actors in that. Patrick Stewart, Mark Hamill, Shia LaBeouf, Uma Thurman. I was like, holy shit. Like,
yeah, so Luke Skywalker and Captain Picard are both in
yeah.
fucking dub.
And it's Oh man, I was just like blown away. I was like, I can't believe this dub is so amazing. Like, who
Yeah.
would blow this much money on this movie? And Disney, of course, they got the Disney money.
Yeah, so
But
it's important to kind of point out the original English dub, which was made back in 1985, was produced by New World Pictures and used a lot of, I guess you would say, like D-list people to come on and do the voices.
D-list, not even B-list.
I mean, a lot of these people. So when I first watched this back in 96, this is the dub I watched. It's not great, but of course, my 6-year-old self at the time didn't think so. I thought it was amazing. But
I mean,
I've gone back and I've gone back and I've rewatched this old dub, and it's bad.
Yeah. Well, given that anime dubbing back in the 80s, even in the 90s, was pretty. It didn't really take off until like the late 90s,
Mm-hmm.
So we really, again, can't fault it for having a bad original dub.
No,
But
of course we haven't. You haven't seen it yet.
yeah,
I
but
will say if there's one like hiccup with the Disney dub, which is what we watched, it's Alison Lohman in the role of Nausicaä. That's probably the only like really stumbling block to this movie in terms of its dub acting.
it's. I mean, as a lead playing character, you have a lot of different lines, and there's a huge range of emotions that Nausicaä goes through. And sometimes it's hard to translate because it's like, we don't have the technology to stretch out this 5-second sequence to 10 seconds to fully get what the meaning was out. So it's definitely a struggle to like some bits with Nausicaa's English dub with Lisa, blanking on her last name, Lohman, yeah, with Lohman. She does a phenomenal job at some points, but there's other points where it's just kind of like, I know this is a bad dub. Like, I know that you're not a bad actor, but I don't know. That's just.
But everyone else was just on point and perfect, especially Patrick Stewart in the role of Lord Yupa. Like, that was perfect.
That Patrick Stewart's performance, man, just like the saving grace of this entire film was his performance. And then Uma Thurman did a phenomenal job as the like antagonist queen as well. I thought Kushana, thank you. And she plays that queen bitch like really well. I actually really did enjoy her performance as well.
I like that she has that line towards the end, like, I have chosen the path of violence.
That was a little bit unnatural, but again, it's just kind of the script. It's kind of hard to translate things.
Yeah.
So it's treason then.
It's treason then. Yeah. Then you had Shia LaBeouf, the not celebrity, as Asbel, who actually did a really good job.
I think he did a phenomenal job, and this was like 2005 Shia LaBeouf, so he wasn't as crazy as he is now.
This is pre-insane Shia LaBeouf.
This is like teenager Shia LaBeouf, right? This is when he was on Even Stevens.
I think he was in his very early 20s, like 2021.
Okay, yeah. So he was like right off of the whole Even Stevens phase, and he's still like not crazy, not as wild as he is. So I thought he did a great job too. As I don't remember the fucking main love interest. I guess I'd call him Asbel. I should probably remember these. I don't remember anyone's names except Lord Upa and Nausicaä. Quite honestly,
it's because they say those names so damn often in the movie.
Exactly. Everyone else plays a very minor part in this film compared to Nausicaä. None
of what we're saying is take anything away from the original Japanese dub. Like, I've seen it too, and it is good. It's really good. But it's just, I grew up watching this dub. I mean, I've watched every Ghibli movie dubbed because I feel like at this point I'm obligated to. And it is one of the better Ghibli dubs, I will say.
I'll just say that we started off like the first 5 minutes with the Japanese dub, and I said, okay, let's switch it to the English one, and then Patrick Stewart comes on. I'm like, all right, we'll keep the dub. I'm just a little adverse to 1980s, even 1990s circa like Japanese dub. They're not that great, Voice acting didn't really start to evolve until like the mid 2000s, in my opinion. Just because
I can just hear people hearing this and saying fucking savage.
I'm just saying
blasphemy.
It's if you know what 1980s and 1990s Japanese dub anime sounds like, and it's not that great.
Yeah, I mean, people there's a lot of like sub purists today who think that, oh my god, you gotta watch sub because these people don't actually act when they're voicing it in English, and I'm like, that's kind of a new thing, you know? Like, if you listen to Japanese dubs from the 70s and 80s, it was pretty ham-fisted then, too.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. So that's just how it is. And we've spent way too much time talking about sound. Holy shit.
Because now, let's move on to the actual story, which I know you have something to say about that, especially the exposition.
So, what do I think of the pacing? It's fucking slow.
It is a 2-hour-long movie.
It is, but here's the problem. All right, exposition, right? The first part of the movie, it takes about the first quarter of the runtime, but it doesn't introduce any of the conflict. And once you've passed that quarter, that's when it finally introduces conflict, and then suddenly the rising action. Like, there were no stakes at all. We were just feeling sad and mopey, like, oh no, the world is distraught. And then all of a sudden, like, conflict, rising action. And I was just like, okay, this is getting somewhere. And then as it ramps up, I just felt like all of a sudden, like, near the last 30 minutes of the fucking film, that's where the climax is, and it feels very subdued. I'm not sure where you would consider the climax was, but I considered the climax when she was fighting that army on that island, right? When Nausicaä was engaging the baddies.
The Ohm.
Yeah, trying to help the Ohm out. I thought that was the climax because it didn't really seem like it fit anywhere else, but it just felt very subdued. And then the resolution isn't really explained. Like, it just kind of happens, and then, like, oh, remember this 5-second tidbit from the beginning of the film? It's the prophecy, it came true! Like, now everything's fine! And I was like, what? 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 And then, you know, it all ends, and the epilogue plays, and it's playing through the credits, so we get to see, like, after the resolution happens, we've got this epilogue, and people are rebuilding, and it's all happy ends, you know, like, this is the happily ever after. And, you know, I love seeing things like that. I've said this in our last review. I love seeing epilogues because I'm just like, I need more closure. That wasn't enough. Don't leave it to my imagination. I'm a shit imaginer person, right? And so, yeah, it's got that going for it. But as for the quality of the narrative, I didn't think it was that great. It was pretty vague at the first, like, about the first quarter, you know, when they're doing the exposition. It's pretty vague, and I didn't like that much. It becomes a lot clearer once you reach, like, the midpoint of the movie, which is why this brings me to the structure. It's kind of weird. It doesn't flow very naturally because the exposition seems very slow, and, you know, when you get past the first quarter and then the second quarter, so basically half of the movie, when it's still doing exposition, it's just very slow. And, you know, I get you're not supposed to divide movies up by that. Like, most exposition is in the first quarter, and then you've got the rising action and the conflict. So it makes sense from a structure point of view. I just didn't like it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with a lot of what you said. One thing that having such a slow build-up in the beginning did allow for is a lot of great world building.
Yeah.
Within a very relatively short amount, like within the span of a typical length of an anime episode, you got an enormous amount of world building.
But again, this comes back to the whole structure. Like, they build the world, but then they don't let us see it. Like, we only get small glimpses of it in the beginning and then sprinkled throughout the rest of the film.
Yeah. I mean, some of that may be down to limitations of the time. They probably wanted to show more, but they just didn't have the budget or the ability animation-wise at the time.
Yeah.
Which is why I think that of all the Ghibli movies, I would like to see Nausicaä remade today, because I think with the technology we have today, it would look better, and I think you could actually parse out the actual narrative a little bit better than it was done before.
Yeah, for sure. And the last thing I want to talk about was Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind is very heavy-handed with their allegories, all right?
It's not just heavy-handed, it slaps you across the face with it.
Yeah, and, you know, it's a good message. It's about pollution and environmentalism, and I liked it. I just would have liked to see more of it, you know? Like, don't just slap it in my face for, like, a split second and, like, oh, you know, humans, ha ha ha, environmentalism. And then I'm like, but I want to see more. There's more to this world than meets the eye, and they poke at it a little bit, but then they kind of just run through all of it. And I'm like, oh, man, what? how are you gonna set up this really cool like poison forest area? Then you set up these humans that are fighting each other. You set up like the ancient bad, the evil, like the warriors. And like, how are you gonna set all this up and then just kind of blow past it? You know, come on. You don't set up this world and blow past it. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, it may be worth mentioning that the movie itself is based on a manga of the same title. It's a 7-volume long manga that wasn't finished at the time that the movie came out.
Okay.
So that might have a lot to do with it, because there's some stuff that was obviously they had to come up with their own ending at the time.
Yeah. So that makes more sense.
The manga ran from 82 to 94.
It's kind of like Full Metal Alchemist. The original run of Full Metal Alchemist, which ended before the manga ended.
Yes. And it's another reason why I say, like, this is probably the movie that I'd like to see redone more than any other Ghibli movie, because, like, it have a proper ending, or at least the ending that the original manga author, which was Hayao Miyazaki, wanted it to have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it would do so much better with today's technology, especially with trying to portray the post-apocalyptic world that they live in. I think that overall, the movie is a really good example of how good animation could be at the time, at least with the budget that they had. But it's so limited to the story they were trying to tell. Very similar to how Legend of Galactic Heroes, the original Legend of Galactic Heroes was, which is currently getting remade. How they were trying to tell such an epic story that was so far beyond the technology and ability they had for animating at the time.
Yeah, I think Nausicaä has a lot that it wants to do. And it just needs to be kind of rebuilt a little bit, you know, and be a little bit more straightforward with the story and add a lot more depth to it, instead of just like showing you this glimpse. Okay, we're gonna trod past this and fly over here and do the next thing. I'm like, come on, flesh it out a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I mean, it may be the first anime I ever watched, and it's like a soft place in my heart, but I don't think it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination. So that being said, after having seen this, what numerical score would you give this out of 10?
Solid 7.
I would give it a 7 as well.
Oh, look at that.
Actually, I'd probably give it more close to a 7.5. So, I mean, on Mal, I have it as a 7, but
I personally would give it a 7 out of 10 because it's a solid film, regardless of my bitching about the narrative and stuff. It's solid. It has a lot more potential, and if it was remade, I would hope that they would let it breathe more. There's a lot more to the story than what is portrayed, and they could definitely go into it. Maybe revive it as an OVA series with like 4 parts or 5 parts. Like, just
or maybe
so much
revive
more.
it as like a 36 episode actual series.
That 36 episodes for 7 volumes. That's about. I'd like that.
Yeah,
that'd be enough, in my opinion, of time to let it breathe. Because there's so much going on.
I mean, hell, we know that sometime within the next few years, we are going to be getting a complete adaptation of Akira.
That's true. I hope they don't fuck it up.
But yeah, I definitely agree. Like a 7.5 out of 10 for me. It's got a lot of nostalgia value for me in particular, but it does, and as good as the message that it's trying to portray is, it definitely has some hiccups. Some of those are due to the era that the anime was made in, but some of it's just due to the design and narrative decisions that were made. But I think overall, I would say the film holds up today as a classic. Would I say it holds up today in terms of animation? No.
Yeah, I would say, honestly, this is the weakest like Ghibli film. No offense, Alex.
Well, one of the weakest, maybe like in the bottom like 3, but no, I wouldn't say it's the weakest.
I wouldn't say, you're right. It's not the weakest. Ponyo's the weakest, but I've made enemies. I can hear them typing on their keyboards now.
I just like how before we started recording, you were comparing this to Princess Mononoke, which is the best Ghibli movie.
I mean, I agree. I think Princess Mononoke is the best Ghibli film, but I was using it as a comparison because, like, how does this film hold up compared to even other Ghibli films? It's not very good. It doesn't, because again, there's a lot of ambitious ideas and a lot of ambitious, like, things happening in the background that we don't get to see anymore. We get introduced to it, but we don't get to see it play out. And Princess Mononoke does a phenomenal job about that. Like, God, our next review is going to be Princess Mononoke, I swear. Just so I can rewatch the film. But That's
Just gonna go through every Ghibli movie.
I mean, it's the only anime movies I can think of. But yeah, I think it holds up pretty well as a classic. I think people who watch it won't be disappointed. Obviously, it's not as good as Princess Mononoke or any of the like newer shows or newer anime movies coming out. But that's just because Shinkai is a god. But other than that, yeah, I'd say give it a watch if you guys want. Like, that's one thing I really want more anime fans to do. Like, we've got people like Sho who are basically new little babies to the anime scene who don't even want to watch anime from the 80s. Like,
Yeah, who just refuses to watch anything made before 1990.
and I get it. There's not very many good shows, but give them a shot. You know, like for one thing that this movie's got going for it is that it is a Ghibli film, so you know the narrative is pretty good. The story is pretty good. It's just not done very well.
Yeah,
my
it's
opinion.
ambitious and it's good, but it could have been so much better. I think
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to say.
Yeah.
All right, and that is our review of Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind. Thank you all there for dropping in to listen to us. We hope you enjoyed it because we always enjoy bringing this stuff to you. If you want to check out previous episodes of the podcast, you can find us on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Spotify. If you want to keep up with what we're doing, you can join us on Discord, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. Shoot us an email if you have any questions or if you have ideas for topics or movies you would like for us to talk about in the future. Links to all these things will be down below in the description. As always, I have been your host, Alex, and I will see you next time. Say goodnight, John.
There's so many continuity errors in this movie. It bothered
Where
me so
did the blue
much.
dress come from?
Why is it blue?
Oh, man.